And with that, I think it's a nice, smooth transition to Tony. Tony CEO from Nasdaq, who has been looking into some of the elements of SupTech and how supervisory technology can contribute, in this case, more in wholesale security markets. Tony, it's great to have you with us again. I remember a good conversation with you a year ago. You were so inspiring that we kind of brought you back together with Petra. So looking forward to hearing from you.
Great. Thank you for having me. I actually always love the conference. I do kind of miss the physical one a little bit, though, the kind of sharing of ideas during the event. I have a few slides I want to share.
Well noted. There are benefits to technology in that we can bring lots of people together in a very efficient way, but not necessarily in that interpersonal way that you're referring to.
Yeah, exactly. And so for my kind of talk today, I am going to talk well, not just a little bit, a fair bit about the technology itself, but I really kind of want to talk a lot about the purpose, right? What is the purpose of kind of 3 different types of technology that we're using? We talk a lot about like specific technologies themselves, and we talk a little bit about how they're used, right? But one of the things I think we don't talk about enough is kind of like, what is the core purpose of technology, right? I really don't believe in the use of technology just for technology's sake. And you kind of, with some of these kind of new novel techniques that we're seeing, that's kind of some of the things that we're seeing out there where people would, I suppose, using blockchain technology, but really not really kind of taking that kind of like, why are we using this technology? So I thought I'd take that step and go talk about the purpose. So in saying that, I thought a good place to start is kind of talk about Nasdaq's purpose, or our own purpose. So Nasdaq's purpose, and kind of we thought about this a lot, is to advance economic progress for all, right? So we really believe that if you have an idea, markets are a great way, or in fact, one of the best ways to match kind of capital with ideas to help grow, help economic growth, right? And really what we are trying to achieve is a kind of fairer economic growth for everyone through more kind of efficient, kind of effective capital markets. And then that's Nasdaq, but then in terms of kind of the part of Nasdaq I'm from, I work for Nasdaq Anti-Financial Crime, right? So this is a kind of smaller part of Nasdaq, and really the focus here is around anti-financial crime technology. So it's not that small business, about 300 million. We have about 1,000 employees globally around the world. We kind of service banks, brokers, regulators, kind of really kind of across the globe. So, but what is kind of like the Nasdaq Anti-Financial Crimes purpose? And really, it's not that complicated. Our purpose is to protect the world from financial crime. So that's what we as a business unit is really trying to do. So going back to that purpose, what does that mean? So more specifically, we protect the world from financial crime by looking at fraud, things like scams, elder abuse. I'll talk a little bit about that later. Check fraud, credit card fraud, kind of people taking over your account. We look at money laundering, and which is kind of to support against terrorist financing, drugs, human trafficking, crime rings. About $2 to $4 trillion is around in the world's illicit activity, and that's and just in the US, I think about 2% of the US GDP is in illicit activity as well. So really via kind of uncovering things such as money laundering, where this illicit money interacts with the legal money environment, this is a way of essentially kind of counteracting or kind of finding these kind of illegal activities. And then finally, particularly focus upon kind of capital markets, we look at market abuse, right? And these are people potentially doing inside trading, market manipulation. These are people trying to manipulate the marketplace. So this is specifically kind of what we are looking at: fraud, money laundering, market abuse, right? And to kind of take it back kind of even kind of a further step, these what kind of give these kind of like some examples of kind of why we're looking at fraud, why we're looking at AML, why we're looking at kind of safeguard market integrity. So to give you an example for safeguarding market integrity, really the key is trust, right? We use technology to safeguard investors from kind of fraud manipulation to ensure that there is kind of trust in the marketplace itself, right? So some examples of types of manipulation that we are kind of looking at with technology are pump and dump schemes where people push up the price of a security and then which attracts other people into that security as well. And then they essentially kind of dump and drop the price. Another example is the kind of meme stocks case that happened a few years back, and is actually, to be honest, still quite ongoing now, where people are essentially kind of, your interaction with kind of potential social media influencers, influencing people to kind of put their money into a security without looking at really the kind of fundamentals of that investment. All right. And kind of where the kind of really helps back to is that if people feel that the marketplace is manipulated, they feel that it's not trustworthy, with kind of that the stocks are just a meme rather than a form of investment, then people kind of don't invest in those securities. Like a great example that I had is I actually I was kind of going through US Customs yesterday, and I was talking to the customs agent, and he actually said that he didn't invest any money in stocks at all, right? Because he didn't trust the stock market, right? So it really is about kind of providing that trust. And if you kind of look at kind of the kind of money and people who have been putting money in crypto, I would say a part of that is people who had that trust eroded during the kind of financial kind of crises that happened in the kind of mid 2000s and the kind of the various kind of things that have happened then, right? So like when I was talking to the customs officer yesterday, he actually mentioned the LIBOR scam as one of the reasons why I didn't trust the stock markets and to invest his money into those marketplaces. And then, so from a kind of fraud perspective, one perfect example of that is around protecting elder abuse or protecting elderly people from scams, right? So people aged 50 plus lost almost $3 billion in fraud in 2021. And on top of that, only about 1 in 23 cases are actually reported to kind of officials. So it's actually quite a significant kind of fraud area. And this kind of covers things from kind of check fraud to kind of people kind of calling up elderly people and kind of convincing them to kind of essentially kind of clear out their bank accounts. So we use technology to find unusual transaction activity in high risk people's accounts, right, to potentially kind of block those activities, or at least kind of confirm those activities are accurate before we let them proceed. And then finally, kind of one of the specific examples around kind of why we look at money laundering is finding human trafficking. This is a great example where we expect it to be $150 billion is kind of expect happens in kind of human trafficking and human smuggling each year, right? So there is a significant volume of kind of financial activity around these kind of human trafficking events, right? And preventing human, looking at money laundering, finding money laundering schemes can help uncover these types of kind of criminal activities. So to go back to it, we look at financial crime, we look at it through those ways, and then kind of really this is kind of like the reasons why we look at and we are using this technology to find the financial crime. So we have the kind of reasons why we are doing things, and then what I want to kind of talk about more specifically is 3 technologies related to those 3 types of behavior that we're trying to stop, that we're trying to kind of go through. So the first one is around big data analytics, processing. So most of our deployments and systems now are cloud-based. If you look at the problems that I mentioned around detecting fraud, around money laundering, around detecting abusive patterns of behavior, all three of them are essentially kind of very similar. They're big data problems. They're about sifting through really kind of like huge data sets, and not just huge data sets, but huge data sets that grow every year, right? So or grow every day even, right? So every day, here it has 30 billion. I think we have some setups that have 60 plus billion records a day that we sift through. And it's something that we sift through every single day. And it's not something you sift through one time, right? So what you need to look at patterns of behavior over time. So we're sifting through not just a single day's data, we're sifting through months and years worth of data to look for that pattern of behavior. So this is really a big data problem. We use cloud technology extensively around this problem. It really helps us in a few different ways. It helps us essentially just kind of scale up, right? It helps us perform faster deliveries, and it helps us perform, in particular, cross-customer analytics. So this is where we're profiling customer behavior across different marketplaces or different entities, right? So and not just kind of across a single marketplace. And then also the cloud and the kind of integrated data processing architecture allows us to kind of integrate insights across our different customers and community, right? We've set up a system, and this is actually in the States. We don't have it in the EU because of some of there's specific regulation in the US that allows this. But we have, in the US, we have data sharing arrangements among some of our customers, allow them to collaborate for detecting bad actors and kind of sharing information about bad actors and potential bad behavior to help build a broader, more refined picture of what is happening. So that is kind of like the big data aspect. The second aspect is around machine intelligence and behavioral analytics. Now, if you look at the problem that we have that I mentioned before, it's really about finding unusual activity, be that money laundering, be that unusual patterns of payments across quite a huge data set of actually quite normal behavior. 99% of the data that we're looking at is perfectly normal, and we're really trying to find that kind of small aspect there. And this is an area where machine intelligence really excels. We're finding that kind of gray potential activity amongst a huge kind of sea of data. So we use AI for fraud detection. We use AI for modeling behaviors to essentially kind of emulate the manipulative behavior that might be happening. What we've also found when using kind of machine intelligence is that it works best to be kind of very specific on how that machine intelligence tool is going to support you. So for example, we have multiple machine intelligence initiatives, each of them providing slightly different specific benefits, right? So I'll give you a few examples. So the first example is we have a machine intelligence initiative, which is scoring or ranking the effectiveness of behaviors that were detected through a rules-based approach. So rules-based approach may detect 100 different potential suspicious behaviors, of which potentially 5 or a subset of them would actually be interesting. This creates a kind of an effort problem amongst the team where you really want your very kind of small set of people who are looking at this focused upon the most interesting behaviors. So we use machine learning to essentially learn what types of behaviors may be more interesting than others by looking at historically what's been more likely to be interesting in the past, right? So the machine learning learns that, for example, this type of behavior, because it happened around this time by this group of participants, is more likely, or by across this set of kind of stocks is more interesting, right? So you will score and rank all the suspicious behaviors between 0 and 100, and the actual kind of fraud team can kind of focus on the ones that are more effective first and kind of less effective later, right? And really kind of help focus their attention. Another way we've used AI is, apart from kind of pure kind of detection of behavior, is around kind of combining different signals together, right? So this is kind of another area where AI is very kind of helpful. So specifically, we use kind of Bayesian statistics or Bayes nets to determine kind of like what groups of signals or detections kind of are more interesting. So, for example, if from a kind of surveillance perspective, if we have unusual price activity that might trigger a signal, plus we have kind of churning or a particular participant trading with himself through the course of the day, plus we're seeing kind of unusual kind of stop loss activity in that day, combining those signals together would maybe a more interesting kind of like, or stronger result compared to if kind of we were purely looking at kind of unusual price activity. All right, so that's why one area of AI is helpful in terms of essentially kind of combining signals together that may have been produced through AI or may have been produced through these rules-based approaches. All right, and then finally, we're using, from a behavioral analytics perspective, we're using behavioral analytics to profile participant activity, right? So the tools may detect the unusual activity occurring, but then through profiling, you can quickly look at that participant or that kind of person and look at their historical activity and say, okay, for this person, this is actually fits in with their historical activity, or it doesn't, or you may profile them as being kind of like a higher risk candidate compared to others, which it doesn't kind of mean that you immediately discard or look at it immediately. But again, we're in a situation where there's a lot of potential, there's a huge data set, there's a lot of potential false positives. And what we're really trying to do is use machine intelligence to sift through that large data sets and reduce the false positives that the surveillance analyst or fraud analyst needs to go through, right? A fraud, you only have such a fairly small size fraud team, right? Looking through kind of potentially huge sets of kind of transactions and data. And then finally, from a blockchain analytics perspective, we're really kind of like following where a lot of this kind of manipulative and illicit activity is happening, and where, so if you look at the manipulation examples, the fraud examples, the kind of money laundering examples, a crypto and kind of crypto assets is an area where a lot of kind of criminals have really kind of taken advantage of the activities that's happening there. Right. So we've kind of invested heavily in blockchain analytics, invested heavily in kind of looking at detecting bad behavior and kind of crypto assets, because that's where a lot of this bad behavior is essentially happening, right? So from an off-chain perspective, we're surveilling the activity that's happening in the centralized exchanges, the transactions that are happening. We're looking for things such as people churning the security. We're looking at people who are maybe kind of pumping up the price of specific coins or tokens. We're looking at people who are kind of essentially not maintaining fair marketplaces for these kind of new assets. And then we're also using kind of blockchain analytics to kind of help determine if a person or that may be kind of transferring a certain kind of crypto or other blockchain assets is a potential kind of red flag. So this includes things like sanction screening, but it also kind of includes things such as like a person that may be receiving funds from accounts that have been tagged for kind of like dark web activity or kind of terrorist financing activity. All right. One of the things that we've really kind of been spending a lot of time on is, and this is kind of, if you look at the actual fraud that is happening, and is that it mixes between the fiat and the crypto. So the kind of real economy and the kind of digital economy, for kind of digital for crime, it is really not kind of located in purely one or the other. So criminals are using a mixture of digital assets and kind of fiat or real assets or traditional assets in their illicit activities. So an example would be one of the elder abuse ones that I mentioned kind of earlier. So where essentially a person may get a scam call saying that, for example, they have back payments in taxes, right? But they may be requested to pay their taxes through a special ATM, which happens to be a Bitcoin ATM, which would create kind of essentially a Bitcoin transaction, right? So what we'd see is unusual activity for this person on their bank account, but that unusual activity would be essentially kind of turning their money into kind of Bitcoin or other types of digital assets, which may be unusual for that particular profile of that particular individual, right? So it is really that mix of traditional and kind of crypto assets that we are focusing on, and that's where we feel that it's essentially most effective. So just to go back, this is the essentially the kind of like some of the three novel new technologies we're using. But just to take it back a step, I mean, though the fraud, kind of market abuse, money laundering, and the reason behind that is kind of very much kind of why we are doing these techniques, and we really kind of confirm that the technology is suited to the problem at hand.
Thanks, Tony, for this very, very interesting presentation and the three different examples of application of technology in the compliance space. And in particular, the last one is interesting just in light of some of the conversations we're going to have this afternoon around AML identification of unhosted wallets and behavior around that. So a perfect introduction into that. Fascinating as always. Thanks for thanks for being with us. We're delighted to have you with us, is rather what I wanted to say. And look forward to the continued conversation with you and others in this conference. Thanks, Tony.
Okay, cheers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.